Okay guys, in this video I'm going to be going over the build of the Realacc X5R frame. This is the 220mm frame that I reviewed a few days ago, and I'll put a card up in the corner if you want to see more details on this frame. I'm just going to go over the parts real quick that I'm going to be putting in here. Start off with the motors, and we're going to start off with these Emax RS2205 2600 kV motors. Going to be using these new Racer Star 32-bit 22 amp ESCs. Supposedly we'll do up to D-Shot 1200. Going to be putting the Runcam Swift Mini in this one. I'm going to be using the VTX 03. This is a micro VTX, so should save a little bit of space and weight. Going to be using this PDB. It's got a 12 volt and 5 volt regulator on there with an XT60 connector. And I'll be using this F4 Betaflight board. It's the Omnibus F4 board, but it's the Banggood clone. It's a little bit different. I think it still has the same LDO problem, or the voltage issue with the LDO getting really hot. However, I'm not going to be using anything other than a 5 volt receiver on this, so it should not get that hot. That's why I'm using the PDB. So I won't be doing any of the mods that you typically see for this board where they take the LDO off. I'll just be using the 5 volt regulator for my camera and VTX off the PDB, and just using the power for the receiver off of the flight controller. So to get started, I'll go ahead, I'll mount the PDB and solder on my ESCs and motors, and then I'll put the next step will be to connect the flight controller and then the FPV system, the camera and the video transmitter. Okay, so for the most part, this build is mostly done electronics-wise. I got the PDB and the flight controller wired up. I got the ESCs wired up to the PDB, and then the motors wired up to the ESCs. And I'm going to show you how I have the underside of this flight controller wired up to the PDB and the ESCs. So basically I've got the signal and ground wires from the ESCs going to the motor signal on the other side of the board over here. I got the ground and the signals soldered on, motors 1 through 4. And then to power the board I have a little ground and a VCC, which is the battery voltage from the PDB right here, going into the VCC connection here on the flight controller, and that will actually power the flight controller and then give battery voltage to the OSD. The next part I have to do is solder on a couple of pigtails for the OSD, which is the video in and video out, and then I'm going to actually power the flight or the FPV system off of the PDB instead of the flight controller, and that's going to be the camera and the video transmitter. So that's going to be in the next part of the video. Oh, I forgot to mention that instead of directly soldering the XT60 to the board, I'm using a little bit of a wire here just in case it pulls off. I don't want that to break, and it also has a little bit of flexibility. So if you, a little tip here, if you guys have these little PDBs with the XT60 on here, don't directly solder it to the PDB. It's actually better to do it this way. So I'll go ahead and I'll mount up the FPV system and wire it up, and then I'll be right back for the next part of the video. Okay, so here's a quick look at how I got my FPV system set up. I switched over to the regular Swift instead of the Mini Swift because I want to use the Mini Swift in something else. So using the same connector anyway, 1.25mm pitch connector here is going underneath the flight controller board to these 3 pins here on this Omnibus F4. I think over here is video in, and then you have 5 volts and ground. This is actually this voltage can be bridged over here to either VBAT or 5 volts. However, if you don't bridge it to anywhere here on the flight controller, it won't use the onboard regulator. It'll actually use it'll just pass the voltage from the one connection here to the other. These are just electrically connected. And in doing so, I'm not putting a strain on the BEC that's on the flight controller. Instead, I got a couple other pigtails back here for power. And this is going to my 5 volt output on my 5 volt regulator on the PDB. And I got another connector here. This one is a 3-pin connector that's going to the OSD over here as well. So these 6 pins here pass the OSD from, pass the video signal from the camera to the OSD to the video transmitter. And I have this setup here is kind of complicated. Normally I wouldn't do this for a normal build, but I want to be able to move this video transmitter from quad to quad. So I have these two set up here so I can disconnect them and then move it to another quad because I have so many builds to do and not enough of these around. So I just have this set up here, and I wouldn't recommend you doing this unless you happen to have a need to move this around a lot. I got my receiver here. This is the Turnigy FlySky receiver. I'm using the 5 volts here on these 2 pins and then the receive pin on RX3. I'm not using the onboard receiver pin because these F4 flight controllers have a hardware inverter, and iBus doesn't work with that, so you have to use a different UART receive pin for that. So I'm using the RX3 for this iBus controller. If you're using a different receiver like an S-Bus receiver from FreeSky, then it's okay because those will work with the onboard hardware inverter. This one does not, so I have it wired a little differently. So that's pretty much it. Pretty simple. Let's go ahead. I'll connect. I'll finish up the installation here and put on the top plate and go take it for a fly. Okay, so here it is fully assembled. I have the battery straps put in and I just have a battery on top here just to show what it looks like. Something that I noticed is that putting my GoPro mount here might be a little bit tricky because normally you put the strap or some sort of like a zip tie or something that goes around the top plate, but there's no holes here to allow a zip tie to go through, so I might have to maybe do a battery strap or something and go all the way around the entire front part here to hold down my little TPU GoPro mount, or go through maybe this side hole here. But yeah, it looks pretty clean. So it looks like a nice build. I think this is a pretty basic frame, 4-inch arms or 4mm arms, and it's a little bit on the heavy side, I think. Let me there's no props in here, but let me get a weight measurement here. Okay, so here's everything fully built but without the props on. 333 grams, and if you throw on 4 more props, say 5 grams each, that's about another 20 grams, so a little bit on the heavy side. Let's throw on our little 1300 tattoo here, and we're just a hair under 500. And then we throw another GoPro, it's going to be about another 80, so maybe 580. So I don't know. Some people think that's kind of heavy. This is probably about average for this size for 5-inch quad. We'll have to see how it flies. So I will roll that footage next.